The wind came down from the high ridges like a cold breath, carrying the smell of pine, ash, and old sorrow. It swept across the narrow valley where forgotten trails crossed and vanished, as if even the land itself wished to be left alone. In that lonely stretch of the Wild West, far from any old West town worth naming, a single cabin crouched against the trees, its rough logs darkened by years of snow and sun. Smoke rarely rose from its chimney, and when it did, it meant the mountain man still lived. He was known by few and spoken of by fewer. Folks who passed through the valley called him Eli Boone, though no one knew if that was the name he was born with or one he took when the rest of his life fell away. He had come west with the others once, chasing rumors of land and freedom, but the frontier had stripped him down to silence. His days were spent trapping, cutting timber, and walking the ridgelines with a rifle across his back. His nights were long, broken only by the crackle of fire and the memories he could not outrun. Loneliness was a constant companion on the mountain. It sat beside him when he ate his beans, lay heavy on his chest when he slept, and followed him into the trees each morning. He had learned to live with it the way a man learns to live with an old wound, by not touching it too often. Frontier life did not leave room for softness, and yet some part of him still listened for footsteps that never came. Down in the valley, closer to the river bend, stood a scattering of buildings that barely deserved the name of town. A trading post, a livery stable, a church with a leaning cross, and a handful of homes patched together from hope and desperation. It was there that a young woman named Ruth was told she had no further use. Her family stood stiff and quiet while a small pouch of coins changed hands, each clink sounding louder than the last. They did not look at her when it was done. Ruth had grown up knowing hunger and hard words. She had worked fields until her hands cracked and bled, cooked meals she never tasted, and learned to make herself small so others would not notice her weakness. A sickness the winter before had left her thinner, slower, and marked in the eyes of those who counted worth by strength alone. In that old West town, mercy was a luxury few could afford. When she was led away, her head was bowed, dark hair pulled tight at her neck. She did not cry. Tears were wasted things out here. Still, inside her chest, something broke loose and rattled like a trapped bird. She did not know where she was going, only that the path behind her had closed. The man who took her did not speak much. He was older, with a beard gone gray at the edges and eyes that had seen too many winters. He walked with the steady pace of someone used to long miles. Ruth followed, her bundle light, her thoughts heavy. As the town faded behind them, the land rose and grew rougher. The river narrowed, pines crowded close. By the time the sun dipped low, the air had turned sharp and thin. They reached the cabin as dusk settled over the mountains. Ruth looked at it with a quiet fear. It was small, weathered, and alone, surrounded by trees that whispered in a language she did not know. This was not a place for a woman cast aside, not a place for anyone who still hoped for kindness. Eli watched her from the corner of his eye as he set down his pack. He had not planned for this. He had come to the valley for salt and powder, nothing more. But when he saw the way the townsfolk spoke of her, the way her family stood apart as if she were already gone, something old and stubborn stirred in him. He remembered a time when he too had been measured and found wanting. He did not touch her, he did not raise his voice. He simply told her the rules of the mountain: work when the sun is up, keep the fire fed, respect the land. He said there would be food, shelter, and safety from the worst of the world. What he did not say was that he did not know how to live with another soul under his roof. That night, Ruth lay awake on a pallet near the hearth, listening to the wind claw at the walls. Every sound made her tense. She expected anger, cruelty, or worse. Instead, there was only silence, thick and uneasy. In that quiet, she felt both terror and a strange, fragile hope take root. Days passed, measured by chores and changing light. Ruth learned the ways of the cabin, the rhythm of frontier life high in the mountains. She gathered water, tended a small patch of earth, and listened to Eli speak of trails long forgotten and a Native American tale of the valley, of spirits that watched over those who did not turn away from suffering. His words were few, but when he spoke of the land, his voice softened as if he were remembering a promise made long ago. Slowly, trust crept in like dawn over the peaks. Ruth found strength she did not know she still carried. Eli found himself listening for her steps in the morning, surprised by the sound of another heartbeat in his home. It was not love, not yet. It was something quieter, more dangerous in its own way. One evening, as clouds gathered low and the air grew heavy with the promise of snow, a distant sound carried up the trail. Hoofbeats, voices, the past, it seemed, had found the forgotten path to Eli's door. He stepped outside, hand resting on the rifle, while Ruth stood frozen in the doorway behind him, the firelight at her back. The mountain held its breath as the figures drew closer, and the fragile life they had begun to build trembled on the edge of change. The riders slowed before they reached the clearing, as if the mountain itself had warned them to tread careful. Eli did not move from where he stood. The rifle stayed low, not yet raised, but his body was set the way a man sets himself when there is no good choice left. Ruth watched the shapes shift through the trees, her heart beating so hard she feared it might give her away. She had known, even in the quiet days, that peace on the frontier was a thing borrowed, never owned. The riders did not stop long. A brief exchange of words drifted up the slope, rough voices carried by the wind, then the sound of hooves faded back down the trail. Eli remained still long after they were gone. When he finally turned, his face was closed again, the softness of earlier days drawn tight like a door barred from the inside. "They won't trouble us tonight," he said, though his eyes searched the tree line. "But men don't ride this high without reason." That night, sleep did not come easy to either of them. The cabin felt smaller, the shadows longer. Ruth lay awake thinking of the valley below, of the life she had been pushed from, and of how easily it could all come crashing back. Eli sat by the dying fire, mending a tear in his coat, his thoughts pulled far into the past. He had once had a family of his own, though few would guess it now. A woman with a laugh like running water, a child who reached for him with both hands. They had followed him west, believing the stories of open land and honest work. But the West had been hungry then, and it had taken more than it gave. A fever swept through their camp one summer, fast and cruel. By the time it passed, Eli was alone, holding graves instead of dreams. After that, he stopped staying anywhere too long. He trapped, traded, and drifted farther from towns and people, until the mountain felt like the only place that did not demand more than he could give. The cabin had been meant as a shelter, nothing else. He had never planned to share it. Ruth's past weighed on her in different ways. Her family had not always been hard. There had been a time, before her mother died, when the world felt kinder, but loss changes people. Her father turned bitter, her brothers sharp with blame. In a land where survival was everything, affection faded quick. When Ruth fell ill, she became a burden in their eyes, a reminder of weakness they feared in themselves. She carried that fear with her now. Every mistake felt like proof she did not belong. Every silence from Eli seemed like the beginning of regret. She worked harder than she needed to, pushing her body past its strength, afraid that rest would make her useless again. The land did not care for such worries. The mountain demanded respect, not effort alone. One afternoon, Ruth slipped on loose stone while gathering firewood. The fall was not far, but it knocked the breath from her and left her shaking on the cold ground. Eli found her there, panic flashing across his face before he could hide it. He helped her up without a word, his hands firm but gentle. Inside the cabin, he wrapped her ankle and set her near the fire. The closeness unsettled them both. Ruth felt his presence like heat against her skin. Eli pulled away too quickly, as if afraid of what staying might awaken. "You don't have to prove anything," he said, more harshly than he meant. "The mountain takes its due whether you offer it or not," she nodded, though the words did little to ease the old ache. Mistrust was a habit hard to break. That night, as snow began to fall outside, Ruth dreamed of her childhood home, of voices calling her name, and woke with tears freezing on her cheeks. As winter crept closer, signs of other lives appeared around them, tracks near the creek, smoke far off in the trees. Eli spoke then of the people who had lived on the mountain long before him. He told her what he had learned from an old native man years back, about reading the land, about leaving offerings of thanks, about the danger of taking without asking. "They're still here in their way," Eli said quietly. "Not all eyes are seen." Ruth listened, drawn to the idea that the land remembered kindness as well as harm. She began leaving small bundles of dried herbs near the stream, gestures learned more from instinct than knowledge. It gave her comfort, though she did not know why. Yet comfort did not chase away the sense of threat hanging over them. The men from the valley returned in talk, if not in body. Eli overheard rumors at the trading post on one of his rare trips down of land claims, of a new road pushing through the mountains, of men who did not care who they displaced along the way. When he returned, his mood was darker. He sharpened tools that did not need sharpening. He checked traps twice as often. Ruth felt the distance grow between them again, a wall built of unspoken fears. One evening, as they shared a quiet meal, Ruth finally spoke. She told him of the day her family turned away, of the sound the coins made, of the shame that still burned her throat. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. Eli listened, his hands clenched around his tin cup. When she finished, there was a long silence. He did not offer comfort, he did not know how. But he nodded once, a small gesture heavy with meaning. "They were wrong," he said at last. "Worth isn't measured that way." The words settled between them, fragile as frost. They did not close the distance, but they softened its edges. Still, both knew the world beyond the cabin would not leave them be. The frontier had a way of finding what was hidden, of testing what little peace a person dared to build. As the first deep snow covered the forgotten trails, a distant gunshot echoed through the valley one night, sharp and warning. Eli rose at once, reaching for his coat. Ruth stood too, fear and resolve mixing in her eyes. Whatever was coming, it would not pass them by. The gunshot did not come again, but its echo lingered in the hollow long after the sound faded. Snow fell heavier through the night, softening the world while sharpening every fear. Eli did not sleep. He sat by the window with the rifle across his knees, watching the dark as if it might move on its own. Ruth stayed near the hearth, pretending to mend a tear that did not need mending, listening to the way his breathing changed when the wind shifted. By morning, the tracks told a troubling story. Fresh prints cut across the lower trail, booted men moving with purpose. Eli crouched to study them, his jaw tight. These were not hunters wandering off course. They walked like men who believed the land already belonged to them. Ruth watched from the doorway, cold biting through her shawl. She felt the old fear return, the sense of being something that could be claimed or discarded. The mountain that had begun to feel like refuge now seemed like a trap. Eli followed the trail partway before turning back. He did not want them leading trouble straight to the cabin. As he returned, he found Ruth packing what little she owned into her bundle. The sight struck him harder than any blow. "You don't have to go," he said. She did not look up. "They came for something. If it's me, I won't have you suffer for it." The words cut deep because they echoed his own thoughts. He had brought her into his life without knowing how to protect her from the world he had fled. Frontier life had taught him that caring was a risk no man survived untouched. "They don't get to decide that," he said, more firmly than he felt. Ruth finally met his eyes. In them he saw fear tangled with trust, a dangerous mix. She nodded slowly and set the bundle aside, though doubt still clung to her like smoke. Days passed under a low gray sky. Eli took longer patrols, sometimes gone from dawn until near dark. Each time he returned, Ruth felt relief wash through her, followed by guilt for feeling it. She busied herself with the cabin, baking bread when flour allowed, patching hides, tending the small stores that might see them through winter. The work steadied her hands but not her heart. On one such day, she found a child's carving tucked away in a corner of the cabin. A small wooden horse, worn smooth by handling. She held it carefully, understanding its meaning without asking. When Eli returned, she set it back where she found it, but the knowledge remained between them, another silent thread binding and dividing them. Eli, for his part, struggled with the pull he felt toward her. He had sworn never to build another life that could be taken from him. Yet each evening when he stepped into the warm light of the cabin and saw Ruth there, the vow weakened. He caught himself listening for her voice, measuring the day by whether she smiled or stood quiet and withdrawn. One night, as a storm raged outside, the wind howling like something alive, the roof groaned under the weight of snow. Ruth woke crying from a dream she could not escape. Eli was beside her before he realized he had moved. He placed a hand on her shoulder, uncertain, then steadied when she leaned into him. For a moment the world narrowed to the sound of the storm and the shared warmth between them. Ruth rested her head against his chest, and Eli felt the fragile truth of it. How easily this could be lost. How deeply it already mattered. When the storm passed, they pulled apart without speaking, both aware that something had shifted. Love hovered close, unspoken, and dangerous. The threat returned not long after, this time wearing a familiar face. A man from the valley rode up openly, hands away from his gun, his smile thin. He spoke of new claims, of progress, of the need to clear out those living beyond the law. He glanced at Ruth with interest that made Eli's blood run cold. "She yours?" the man asked. Eli's answer was slow, measured. "She's under my roof." The man laughed softly. "That can change?" After he left, Ruth shook with anger and fear. "They'll come back," she said. "And next time they won't ask." Eli knew she was right. The mountain no longer hid them. Choices pressed in from all sides, each carrying its own cost. Fight and risk everything. Run and lose what they had begun to build. Or surrender to a world that had already judged them. That night Ruth spoke of leaving before things worsened. Eli spoke of standing his ground. Neither convinced the other. The space between them filled with words left unsaid, with the weight of futures they could not see clearly. As winter deepened, supplies grew thin. Eli considered trading more often, despite the risk. Ruth worried each time he left, fear tightening her chest until his return. She began to realize that her heart had chosen, even if her mind still resisted. Far below, men planned and talked, unaware of the fragile bond forming high in the mountains. Or perhaps they knew and did not care. The West had little patience for quiet love. One evening, as the sun bled red over the peaks, Ruth stood beside Eli outside the cabin. Their shoulders brushed, neither pulling away. The land lay vast and indifferent before them, beautiful and cruel in equal measure. Whatever came next would test them both, and neither could be certain they would survive it unchanged. Winter tightened its grip without mercy. Snow buried the forgotten trails until the valley below seemed cut off from the rest of the world, as if the mountain had decided to keep its secrets for itself. Yet, even beneath the quiet white cover, danger stirred. Eli felt it each morning when he stepped outside and found signs that did not belong to the land. A snapped branch where none had fallen before. Ashes near the creek that were not his. The sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. Ruth felt it too, though she could not read the signs the way Eli did. She felt it in the way her chest tightened whenever he reached for his coat, in the way silence settled heavier after sunset. She began to dream of hands pulling her away again, of voices calling her useless, of doors closing no matter how fast she ran. One evening, Eli did not return before dark. The fire burned low as Ruth waited, pacing the narrow space of the cabin. She told herself he had been delayed by weather or a long trapline, but fear would not be reasoned with. Outside, the wind rose, carrying snow like knives. She wrapped herself in a coat and stepped into the storm, calling his name until her throat burned. When she found him, he was kneeling near the tree line, blood staining the snow beneath his sleeve. He waved her back at first, but the relief in his eyes betrayed him. Ruth helped him inside, her hands steady despite the terror pounding through her. The wound was not deep, but it was proof of what they both knew. The valley men were no longer content to wait. They were testing, Eli said once the bleeding slowed. Seeing how far they could go, Ruth sat beside him, anger and fear tangled tight. "They'll take everything if we let them." Eli looked at her then, truly looked, and saw the strength she had found on the mountain. He saw that she was no longer the woman who had been traded away like a broken tool, and that frightened him more than the men below, because it meant she had something worth protecting, something that could be lost. He spoke of leaving, of moving deeper into the high country where no road would ever reach. The words tasted like defeat, but they were safe. Ruth listened, her heart pulling in another direction. Running had been her whole life. The thought of doing it again, of giving up the first place that had ever felt like home, hollowed her out. "If we leave," she said quietly, "they'll do this to someone else." The truth of it settled between them. The Old West was full of people pushed aside by stronger wills. The mountain had given them shelter, but it could not protect the valley below. That night, Eli taught Ruth how to load the rifle. His hands hovered near hers, careful, guiding. The closeness carried weight now, heavy with what might soon be taken. Ruth met his gaze, searching for something to anchor her. Eli found himself leaning closer, resting his forehead against hers, a silent promise passing between them. In that moment, love was no longer just possible. It was real, fragile, and dangerous. The next days blurred together in preparation and dread. Eli set traps closer to the cabin, not for animals but for warning. Ruth packed what she could not bear to lose, then unpacked it again, torn between hope and fear. She thought of the native tales Eli had shared, of standing your ground without hatred, of choosing what kind of mark you left on the land. The men came at dawn. Ruth saw them first, dark shapes moving through the trees, confident now. Eli stepped outside to meet them, rifle slung but not raised. His voice carried calm he did not feel. Words were exchanged, sharp and cold. Claims were made. Threats followed, spoken with smiles that held no warmth. One man reached for Ruth as she stood in the doorway. Eli moved then, placing himself between them. The moment stretched thin, every breath a risk. Ruth felt time slow, the world narrowing to the space between men who believed strength was the only law. A shot rang out, not aimed to kill but to warn. Snow burst from a nearby trunk. The men froze, surprise flashing across their faces. They had not expected resistance. They had not expected her. Ruth stood with the rifle raised, hands trembling but sure. She did not fire again. She did not need to. The message was clear. The men withdrew, but not in defeat. Their eyes promised return. Eli knew it as surely as he knew the shape of the mountain. This had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. As silence fell again, Ruth lowered the rifle, her strength leaving her all at once. Eli caught her before she fell, holding her close as the truth settled in. There would be no easy path from here. No quiet days untouched by fear. They stood together in the falling snow, bound by choice now, not circumstance. The mountain loomed around them, ancient and indifferent, as if waiting to see what kind of story they would carve into its memory. Far below, the valley stirred with plans and anger, and the fragile hope born in the cabin trembled on the edge of everything that could still be lost. The men did return, but not the way Eli feared. They came slower this time, not riding hard with threats on their tongues, but moving with caution as if the mountain itself had begun to unsettle them. Word travels strangely in the west, carried by snowmelt and campfire talk, and stories grow teeth along the way. By the time they reached the lower trail again, the tale was no longer of a lone mountain man and a cast-off woman, but of a place that would not bend easily. Eli did not wait for them at the cabin. At first light, he went down to the valley alone, leaving Ruth watching from the doorway, her heart tight with fear. He carried no rifle, only the worn axe he had used for years to shape his life on the mountain. It was not strength he meant to show them, but resolve. He found them near the trading post, arguing over maps and claims. When they saw him, the talk stopped. Eli spoke plainly, his voice steady. He told them the land had no clear lines, that it fed who respected it and punished those who did not. He reminded them of winters that buried men careless with ambition, of trails that vanished when greed walked them too hard. Some laughed. Others listened. Then an older man stepped forward, one who had seen enough of the West to know when a fight would cost more than it gained. He asked Eli what he wanted. The question surprised them all. Eli answered simply, "To be left alone." The valley men talked long after he left. They weighed effort against reward, danger against pride. In the end, they chose the easier path, the one that did not climb into thin air in stubborn silence. The road would bend elsewhere. Claims would be pressed where resistance was softer. When Eli returned at dusk, Ruth was waiting. She saw the answer in his shoulders before he spoke. Relief broke through her like sunlight after storm, and she laughed, the sound startled and free. Eli watched her then, truly watched, and knew the mountain had already given him more than he had ever dared ask. Spring came slow, but it came. Snow retreated from the forgotten trails, leaving behind dark earth and the promise of green. Ruth planted a small garden near the cabin, her hands sure now, her body stronger than it had been in years. Eli repaired the roof, expanded the walls, turning shelter into home. They spoke of the past more openly as time softened its edges. Eli told her of the family he lost, of the guilt he carried for surviving when they did not. Ruth spoke of her mother, of kindness learned and nearly forgotten. In those shared stories, old wounds found air enough to heal. One evening, Eli asked Ruth to walk with him to a clearing above the creek. There, where the trees opened to the sky, he had built something new. A second cabin, smaller, warmer, meant not for hiding but for living. He told her it was hers if she wanted it, and his if she would have him. Ruth did not answer at once. She looked at the work of his hands, at the care in every joint and beam. She thought of the girl she had been, sold and silenced, and of the woman she had become, standing on her own ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I'll stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. Because this is where I choose to be." They were married quietly, without witnesses but the mountain and the wind. There was no church bell, no fine dress. Only vows spoken plain and true, promises shaped by hardship and hope. Eli carved Ruth a ring from silver traded years before, and she wore it like a badge of survival. Life did not grow easy, but it grew full. Children came in time, their laughter echoing where silence once ruled. They learned the trails, the stories, the respect owed to land and spirit. Ruth taught them gentleness alongside strength. Eli taught them patience, the kind earned through loss. Sometimes travelers passed through, drawn by rumors of a place that endured. Eli offered food and guidance. Ruth offered warmth and understanding. No one stayed long, but many left changed, carrying a piece of the mountain with them. Years later, when Eli's hair had gone white and Ruth's hands bore the marks of long labor, they stood together at dusk, watching the sun settle behind the peaks. The world below still turned restless, chasing progress and forgetting costs. But up here, on forgotten trails, peace had taken root. Ruth leaned against Eli, content in the quiet. She had not been useless. She had been waiting, and the mountain, ancient and watchful, held their story gently, a testament to love earned through endurance and to the quiet hope that survives even the harshest frontier.